My name is Evelyn Harper, and I'm 63 years old. I didn't expect the bank lobby to become the place where my entire sense of family shattered, but that's exactly what happened. One moment I was standing beside my brother, believing we were simply verifying a few documents after my husband's passing, and the next I was listening to him claim that my husband's $90,000 life insurance payout belonged to him. Not to me, not to Daniel's widow, to him. I felt the air shift before I fully understood what I was witnessing. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sharp and cold, while the smell of printer toner and old carpet clung to every corner. My brother's voice came out steady, almost rehearsed, as he slid a crisp document across the counter toward the bank clerk. I didn't know it yet, but that piece of paper would become the symbol of a betrayal I never thought he was capable of. "I'm the sole beneficiary," he said, nodding toward the form as if its truth were indisputable. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for clarity, for something that could explain what I was hearing. But he wouldn't look at me. His jaw was set in that determined angle he used to get when he stole things as a teenager. Small things, stupid things, things he believed he deserved simply because he wanted them. Back then, I thought he'd grow out of it. Back then, I believed he'd eventually learn gratitude, humility, responsibility. Now, watching him try to rewrite my husband's final wishes, I realized he'd grown into a far more dangerous version of that same boy. The bank clerk, a young woman with neatly pinned hair and a slight, cautious frown, lifted the document and studied it. Her eyebrows drew together, and I could almost hear the gears turning behind her expression. Something didn't add up. Something didn't match. "Sir," she said carefully, "I'm going to pull up our internal file to cross-reference this." My brother waved a dismissive hand. "It's all there. Just process the deposit." His confidence wasn't confidence. It was possession. It was expectation. It was the belief that he had already won. I felt the room tilt, not dramatically, just a slow, unsettling lean that made it difficult to stay still. I clutched the edge of the counter to steady myself. My brother didn't see it, or maybe he didn't care. "I'm sorry," I said quietly to the clerk, trying to keep my voice level. "There must be some confusion." "There's no confusion," my brother snapped, cutting me off before I could even form the sentence. His voice sharpened like broken glass. "Daniel left it to me." Even hearing my husband's name in his mouth made something inside me tighten. It wasn't just the lie, it was the entitlement dripping from every syllable, as though my grief, my marriage, and my life were nothing but obstacles in his way. A few customers in line shifted uncomfortably. One woman folded her arms. Another man glanced between us, sensing the tension, but trying to look like he wasn't. The clerk cleared her throat and turned to her monitor. Keys clicked. A digital file opened. My brother leaned forward. "See, it should match. Just read it." But the clerk didn't read it. Not yet. Her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "I'm verifying the original beneficiary designation," she said, her voice measured. "One moment." My heartbeat hammered under my ribs. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until my chest ached. I tried again. "Mark." He cut me off a second time, louder this time, his voice echoing across the sterile lobby. "Evelyn, stop embarrassing yourself." The words hit me like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were calculated. They weren't meant to shut me up. They were meant to make me feel small enough to stay silent. But the clerk wasn't ignoring me anymore. She was paying attention, closely. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she scrolled through the file. Then she leaned in toward the screen, her face tightening with surprise. "Sir," she said, addressing my brother slowly, "this doesn't match." My brother stiffened. "What do you mean it doesn't match?" The clerk tilted the monitor toward herself again, her eyes scanning the line containing the beneficiary's legal name. She adjusted her glasses, then began reading aloud, syllable by syllable, as though the truth needed to be carved into the air with careful precision. "The listed beneficiary is—" My brother lunged forward suddenly, slapping his hand over the counter. "Don't read that out loud," he barked. The outburst ripped through the lobby. A pen rolled off someone's desk and clattered onto the floor. A child stopped swinging his legs in a nearby chair. Conversations halted. "Sir," the clerk said firmly, "I need to verify the information." "I said don't read it," he shouted, something wild flashing in his eyes. I felt my pulse thundering in my ears. Every instinct told me I was moments away from hearing the truth my brother didn't want spoken, not even in a nearly empty bank lobby, not even in front of me. The clerk straightened her posture, swallowed once, then lifted her chin. Whatever hesitation she had before was gone. What remained was duty. Her voice didn't shake. "The beneficiary is—" My brother reached across the counter in a reckless attempt to grab the monitor, but he wasn't fast enough. The name fell from the clerk's lips like a stone dropping into deep water. My brother froze. All the color drained from his face, drained so quickly it was as though someone had pulled a plug inside him. And in that moment, as the name echoed between us, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated, months in the making, and my brother had never expected to be caught. For more than 3 decades, I worked as a school counselor, guiding anxious teenagers through heartbreaks, mediating feuds that felt like the end of the world, and learning the delicate art of listening without judgment. People often told me I had a calming presence, the kind that made them feel safe enough to unravel their tangled thoughts. I used to take pride in that. I still do, though the past year has pushed that calmness to its absolute limits. I retired right before my husband Daniel got sick. Not because I wanted to stop working, but because he asked me to. We'd been married for 38 years, and when you share that much life with someone, birthdays, hospital stays, burnt dinners, road trips, shared secrets, whispered apologies, it becomes a kind of second skin. His laugh, his routines, the way he could predict my mood by the way I stirred my tea. All of it left an imprint on me so deep that losing him felt like losing gravity itself. His death carved out a hollow inside me that still hasn't fully closed. Some days it's soft and quiet, like a bruise that only hurts when pressed. Other days, it's a deafening ache that fills every corner of the house. The chair he used to sit in, the jacket he forgot to donate, the coffee mug with the tiny chip in the rim he always swore he'd fix. I live among these artifacts the way an archaeologist lives among ruins, carefully, reverently, afraid to disturb their silence. Even before Daniel passed, I had spent most of my life caring for others. It's a role that began in childhood, long before I understood what it meant to be responsible. My mother, God rest her, had a way of turning siblings into rivals. She didn't do it maliciously. It was just how she survived the chaos of her own upbringing. She praised one child to punish another. She chose favorites like lottery numbers, and they changed week to week. I learned young that harmony didn't happen on its own. Someone had to maintain it. Someone had to be the one who smoothed the edges, held the tension, absorbed the blow. That someone became me. My younger brother, Mark, grew up in that same household, but he walked away from it differently. While I learned to stay steady, he learned to grab for more. More attention, more money, more sympathy. He was charming, disarmingly so, but always in financial trouble, always one mistake away from another crisis. I spent years bailing him out emotionally, and sometimes literally, convincing myself I was doing the right thing. That family loyalty meant rescuing him, even when it drained me. Daniel used to tell me that my kindness was my greatest strength and my greatest vulnerability. "You don't know how to stop caring," he'd say, half smiling, half worried. He wasn't wrong. I'd built my identity around responsibility, financial, emotional, practical. I budgeted every penny, I documented every decision, not because I was controlling, but because I'd lived through the consequences of disorder. I believe that if you kept your papers straight, if you handled life with integrity, if you faced conflict with calm reasoning, you could prevent chaos from taking root. It turns out, life doesn't always play by the rules you set. After Daniel's death, that hollow ache inside me left me vulnerable in ways I didn't recognize. Grief softens your defenses, weakens your instincts. It makes you overlook the small things that don't feel right. And Mark, perhaps without even meaning to at first, slipped into the space Daniel left behind. He called more often. He offered to help with paperwork. He asked questions about finances, just to make sure you're secure. I thought he was trying to be supportive, maybe even growing up at long last. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe it. But looking back, the warning signs were painfully clear. Mark had always been drawn to money the way some people are drawn to fire. Fascinated, reckless, convinced they won't get burned. He lived beyond his means, jumped from one business idea to the next, and treated other people's stability as a safety net for his own impulsiveness. I knew that. I've always known that. Yet I trusted him anyway, because deep down I still clung to the fantasy that family could heal, that we could rewrite the patterns inherited from our mother, that if I just stayed patient, stayed steady, stayed myself, Mark would eventually meet me halfway. But Daniel had warned me, not harshly, not bitterly, just with the quiet clarity of a man who saw the world without illusion. He'll take whatever you don't protect, he once said, not because he hates you, but because he believes it's owed to him. Integrity became my anchor after Daniel passed. It wasn't just a moral decision, it was a way of honoring him. He lived his life with such steady decency. He believed in earning what you received, in keeping promises, in facing hardship with dignity. I couldn't bear the thought of tarnishing his memory by letting anything surrounding his death become messy or corrupt. Every form, every bill, every decision, I handled it with the same precision Daniel would have wanted, which is why the moment in the bank lobby shook me so deeply. The forged document, the entitled claim, the confidence with which Mark insisted the money belonged to him. I hadn't told anyone, not even him, about the $90,000 policy. Daniel and I were private people. That policy wasn't a windfall. It wasn't some luxury. It was meant to cover final expenses, medical bills, and the adjustments that come after losing half of a household's income. It was meant for survival, not greed. So as I left that bank, trembling, stunned, and betrayed, one question clung to me with cold, unrelenting fingers. How did Mark even know that policy existed? I never told him, not once. And the answer to that question was the first thread that would unravel everything. When I look back at my life with Mark, I realize I spent more time mothering him than being his sister. It began when we were children, him with his wide, pleading eyes and boundless energy, me with an instinctive urge to protect him from our mother's unpredictable moods. She could be warm one day and icy the next, and Mark reacted to that instability by reaching for anyone who would rescue him. I became that person. I bandaged his scraped knees, covered for him when he broke things, and soothed him when he got overwhelmed. I was barely 10 years old, but already playing the role of peacemaker, caretaker, emotional shield. By the time we reached our 20s, Mark had developed a certain charm that made people forgive him more easily than they should have. He knew how to make people laugh, how to win over strangers, how to spin a story just enough to get what he wanted. But underneath that charisma was a restlessness that often brewed trouble. He drifted from job to job, borrowed money with big promises to pay it back, and stumbled into debt like it was a path he couldn't help but follow. I suppose I always felt responsible for him. That's what childhood conditioning does. It teaches you to keep carrying the weight long after you've grown strong enough to set it down. Even after I married Daniel and created a stable life of my own, Mark continued to orbit around me, always a little too close, always a little too needy. Our relationship wasn't warm, not really. It was obligatory, predictable, a cycle we both knew and played into. Daniel saw it sooner than I did. He had a way of observing people without judging them, watching the patterns they repeated. And with Mark, he noticed the manipulation woven into every crisis, every phone call, every apology. He would warn me, gently, "He's using your empathy, Evie. He knows exactly how you'll respond." I would brush it off. "He's my brother, Dan." Family helps each other. But Daniel would just sigh, not arguing, only watching, only waiting. He wasn't the type to interfere unless he had proof, and proof with Mark always showed up eventually. There were signs I missed, subtle at first, then unmistakable once I replayed them in my mind. Mark asking strange questions about our finances, about Daniel's retirement plan, about our long-term security. At the time, I chalked it up to idle conversation, but looking back, there was a glint in his eyes, a curious, probing spark that didn't belong to a brother concerned for our well-being, but to a man measuring opportunities. Then there was the dinner. The last real family gathering before Daniel's health began to decline sharply. We sat around my small dining table, the one Daniel built 30 years ago, And as we ate, Mark kept circling back to questions that made Daniel stiffen. What kind of insurance do you have? Do you guys have everything settled, just in case? Any big accounts Eve might not know about? He masked his interest with jokes, but Daniel's hand tightened around my thigh under the table. I remember thinking he was being paranoid. Now I know he saw what I refused to. After that dinner, small frictions began slipping into the cracks of our interactions. Mark would show up unannounced, just to check on us. He'd comment on the lock on the side door, on the stack of mail on the counter, on the file organizer Daniel kept in his study. He'd say things like, "You two should really get your paperwork in order," or, "You never know what could happen, better to be prepared." At the time, it didn't feel sinister, just intrusive, annoying, a little too interested for comfort, but grief makes you rewrite things. And once Daniel passed, I made the mistake of assuming loss would soften Mark's edges. I had this naive hope, foolish really, that hardship might bring us closer. That maybe he'd finally show me the brother I had mothered all those years ago. The day he offered to help with the post-death paperwork, I felt something I rarely felt toward him: gratitude. I thought he was stepping up. I thought maybe the fear of losing someone had humbled him, grounded him. He told me he knew how confusing paperwork could be after a death. He said, "Just let me look things over for you, Eve. You've been through enough." It sounded compassionate. It sounded brotherly. So I handed him Daniel's medical folder. I handed him access to information I should have kept to myself. I handed him trust he had not earned. And when he sat at my kitchen table flipping through insurance letters, medical bills, and hospice documents, I felt Daniel's voice in the back of my mind, a quiet warning, a gentle tug at my conscience. But I pushed it aside. I didn't want to believe Mark had ulterior motives. Not then. Not when I was so raw, so tired, so vulnerable. I should have listened. Now, replaying those weeks in my mind, certain moments rise to the surface with a clarity they didn't have before. Mark lingering a little too long over the insurance envelopes. Mark slipping papers back into the folder in the wrong order. Mark asking where Daniel's policy papers were kept. Questions I answered without thinking. I see it all now. The breadcrumbs he left, the groundwork he laid. But the moment that hits hardest came to me just recently, uninvited and sharp. A memory I'd buried under the fog of grief. It happened late one evening. Mark was leaving my house after a long day of helping me sort paperwork, and he held Daniel's medical folder tight under his arm as he headed for the door. I remember calling out, "Mark, you forgot to give that back." He froze, just for a heartbeat. Then he forced a smile, returned to the table, and slipped the folder into the stack I kept in Daniel's drawer. I thought nothing of it then. But standing in the quiet of my kitchen after the bank incident, the memory hit me with the force of a falling beam. Something was missing from that folder afterward. Something important. Something Mark should never have had access to in the first place. And the moment I realized exactly what was gone, my whole body went cold. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, one of those gray, unremarkable days when the air feels too still, like the world is holding its breath. I found the envelope wedged between a grocery store circular and an alumni newsletter I never read, a thin white envelope from Hartford Mutual Life Insurance. I assumed it was a routine confirmation of something I had filed weeks earlier. But when I tore it open, the words inside didn't match anything I recognized. "Your claim has been initiated. Awaiting final verification. Representative on file, Mark Harper." For a long moment, I just stared at the page, the text swimming in and out of focus. I had never filed a claim, not a single form. I knew I needed to. I knew it was part of the responsibilities left in the wake of Daniel's passing. But grief had a way of slowing time. And paperwork always felt like a second loss. Signing things, submitting things, closing accounts. Every step was another acknowledgement that Daniel was gone. But I hadn't filed anything yet. A cold ripple worked its way down my arms. I read the letter 3 times, waiting for the meaning to shift into something logical. It didn't. My hand shook as I dialed the number listed at the bottom. A recorded voice greeted me, then a series of prompts that felt unbearably slow until, finally, a representative answered. "This is Laura at Hartford Mutual. How can I help you today?" I swallowed hard. Yes, I received a letter saying a claim was initiated on my husband's life insurance policy, but I haven't filed one yet. A pause. What is your husband's name? I gave it. Spelled it twice. More typing. I could hear her nails tapping the keys, sharp, efficient, unaware of the storm gathering on my end of the line. Yes, she said finally, I see the active claim here. Active? My voice rose without permission. I didn't submit anything. Well, she continued, it shows that a representative submitted the beneficiary form and death certificate on your behalf. A Mark Harper. My breath caught. My brother? The words tasted wrong as they came out. He has no authority to do that. I understand, but the system shows his name listed as the contact and representative on the submitted form. What form? The beneficiary designation. Another pause. Actually, Mrs. Harper, you're listed as the beneficiary on file, but the submitted document, well, it doesn't match the original. I pressed my palm against my forehead. What does that mean? Would you like me to email you the copy we received? I said yes, though my voice barely made it past my throat. When the email arrived, I opened it instantly, and there it was, the forged document. My name in the beneficiary line had been scribbled out, Mark's written in, and below it, in a shaky imitation of my handwriting, a signature, my signature. Only it wasn't mine. The lines were too jagged. The curl of the Salway Y was wrong, the spacing uneven. A child could have spotted the forgery, let alone an insurance company. I felt something tighten in my chest, something hot and sharp. Anger, disbelief, grief, it all collided inside me, creating a pressure that made the room feel smaller. My own brother had not only taken Daniel's documents, he had rewritten them. Mrs. Harper, the representative's voice came through the phone. The claim is currently paused, but the next step is identity verification at your local bank. It must be done in person. My hand trembled as I gripped the receiver. Paused? You mean it wasn't denied? Not yet, she said gently. Identity verification will determine whether the submitted paperwork is valid. I thanked her and hung up, though I can't recall the last words I spoke. A ringing silence filled the house, the kind that presses against your ears, making your own heartbeat sound like footsteps behind you. Then the phone rang again, my cell phone this time. Mark. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but dread and fury pulled me to answer. Hey, Eve, he said casually, as if nothing at all was wrong. Got your letter yet? Every muscle in my body stiffened. What did you do, Mark? I'm helping you, he replied, offended by my tone. It's complicated stuff. I just got the ball rolling so you wouldn't have to deal with it. You forged my name, I whispered. God, Eve, don't be dramatic. His voice was light, almost amused. Look, they just need us both to go to the bank for the final step. Identity confirmation. Easy. We'll get it sorted. We? My voice scraped out of me. Yeah. He exhaled, annoyed I wasn't playing along. They need the beneficiary to show up, and that's me. So just come with me, so it doesn't look weird. Weird. That word nearly made me laugh. Nearly. Instead, I agreed to meet him, not because I trusted him, but because I needed to see exactly how far he'd go. When we arrived at the bank, everything about him changed. The casual tone vanished, replaced by a cold, clipped urgency. His shoulders were squared, his jaw set. His eyes carried a glint I had never seen before. Not desperation, but confidence. Confidence that he would walk away with money that wasn't his. He kept tapping his foot against the floor while we waited, rehearsing a version of the story he thought I'd support. Just stay calm, he muttered. Don't complicate things. He was the one complicating everything. But I stayed quiet, letting him reveal himself in real time. When the clerk called us up, Mark stepped forward with mechanical precision. He pulled out the forged beneficiary form like it was a winning lottery ticket. He pushed it across the counter. I'm here for the insurance payout, he said. The clerk began typing, checking the system. Her expression shifted. Doubt, concern, professional caution. Mark leaned in. It's all correct. I'm the rightful beneficiary. I opened my mouth to speak, to intervene, but once again, Mark's voice sliced ahead of mine. Just read it, he demanded. My name's right there. The clerk hesitated, then clicked into the official file, She scanned the screen. Her eyes widened, just slightly, but enough. "Sir," she said carefully, "I'm pulling up the original document now." Mark's breathing grew shallow. His fingers drummed wildly against the counter. "The beneficiary is," she began, and just before she finished reading the name aloud, Mark lunged forward, slamming his palm against the counter. "Don't read that," he shouted. But the clerk had already seen the truth, and as she lifted her chin, preparing to read the real, original beneficiary aloud, I felt every nerve in my body brace for the moment that would tear our family apart for good. The moment I walked out of the bank, my legs felt unsteady, as if the floor beneath me had shifted into something unreliable. Betrayal does that. It rearranges the world so nothing feels familiar. For a few minutes, I sat in my car with my hands gripping the steering wheel, letting my breath settle into something steady. I wasn't ready to cry yet. I wasn't even ready to be angry. I needed clarity, truth, documentation. That was always my language. So before driving home, I returned to the insurance office and asked for every single document related to Daniel's policy. Originals, copies, digital logs, access records. They printed a stack thick enough to bruise if dropped on a foot. And as I drove away, those pages sat in the passenger seat like a quiet accusation. When I got home, the first call I made was to an estate lawyer. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wasn't even thinking about punishment. I simply needed someone who understood the legal shadows Mark had stepped into. Someone impartial. Someone who would tell me whether what I'd witnessed at the bank was a misunderstanding or a crime. The lawyer, a calm woman named Marisa Lang, invited me to come in that same afternoon. I brought every document I had, including the forged form the insurance company had emailed me. She skimmed through the pages with a kind of practiced alertness. I watched her eyes move, narrowing, pausing, darting over the details the way a musician scans a score for wrong notes. Finally, she set the forged form down and leaned back in her chair. "Evelyn, this is not subtle. This is direct fraud." My heart clenched. Hearing it spoken aloud made it real. She pointed to the signature at the bottom of the document. "The dates don't match your husband's last notarized paperwork. The notary stamp is expired. And the signature here. This isn't your handwriting. It's not even close." I swallowed hard. "So he could face charges?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. Fraud. Forgery. Attempted theft of a life insurance payout. This could lead to felony charges. But before we decide anything, I need to understand the timeline." The timeline. Yes. That was something I could build. Something rational, structured, controllable. Something to hold on to when everything else felt unsteady. After leaving her office, I went straight home and pulled Daniel's file box from the study. It was heavier than I remembered. Maybe because so much of it felt like him. His handwriting, his notes, his careful order. I opened each folder one by one, searching for anything that looked touched, moved, or missing. And then, there it was, a small gap, a missing document, the same gap I had sensed in the bank but hadn't named until now. Daniel's original beneficiary confirmation letter, the one he'd proudly shown me years earlier, was gone. I sat back on my heels, breath catching. That letter had been inside the folder the day Mark asked to look through paperwork. I remembered him pressing the folder to his chest as he walked toward the door. I remembered the brief moment of hesitation before he handed it back. And now, the missing piece had a shape, a purpose, a consequence. I needed more evidence, so I scrolled through old messages on my phone. I found them faster than I expected. Text after text from Mark. "Do you know where Daniel's ID is? Can you send me a picture of his insurance number so I can check something? Do you have copies of the old forms, just in case?" At the time, I'd thought he was trying to help. Now it looked like reconnaissance. That evening, while I was taking out the trash, my neighbor, Bea, an observant widow with a soft voice, called out from her porch. "Evelyn, can I ask something? I've been thinking about it since you mentioned trouble with your brother." I walked over, rubbing my arms against the breeze. Bea frowned thoughtfully. "During Daniel's hospice months, I saw Mark at your house once when you weren't home. I assumed you asked him to pick something up." I felt my stomach tighten. "When was this?" "Late in the afternoon. Maybe a month before Daniel passed." She hesitated. He came out of your back door holding a folder, big manila one. I felt the ground shift under me, slow and ominous. I thanked her, trying not to let my voice betray the storm rising in my chest. Back inside, I called the insurance investigator assigned to Daniel's case. The woman recognized my name immediately. Mrs. Harper, I've been reviewing your file. Actually, I was about to contact you. A pit opened in my stomach. What did you find? Well, she began. When the claim was initiated, the contact address on file was changed. It was switched to a P.O. box, not your home address. My pulse quickened. What P.O. box? She gave me the number. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Daniel's. But I knew exactly whose it was. Mark Harper, she confirmed a beat later. He registered it 2 months before the claim. I sank into a chair, gripping the phone. Mark hadn't stumbled into this situation. He'd orchestrated it. He'd planned ahead, opened a P.O. box, collected documents, gained access to files, copied my signature, changed contact information. He built an entire pipeline that funneled Daniel's policy directly to him, and he'd done all of it while standing in my kitchen, while accepting my hospitality, while watching my husband fade. The betrayal didn't feel sharp. It felt heavy, like drowning under slow, relentless waves. The grief I'd barely learned to manage now mixed with this new violation, forming something sour and suffocating inside me. But I didn't let it overwhelm me. I turned to what I knew: order, clarity, logic. I built a timeline: every text, every visit, every document, every irregularity, every shift in Mark's behavior, every date the insurance company logged. Piece by piece, I assembled the truth. By midnight, my kitchen table was covered with papers arranged in neat columns. I had dates circled, notes highlighted, details cross-referenced. It wasn't anger that kept me working. It was purpose. Once I understood the full picture, I could decide what to do. I had just sat down to rest when my phone lit up on the table. Marisa Lang, attorney. I picked up immediately. Her voice was urgent, clipped, nothing like the calm professionalism she usually carried. Evelyn, she said, your brother just filed something new. I gripped the phone. What did he file? You need to come in immediately, she said. There's no time to wait. And with that, the quiet night cracked open again. I arrived at Marisa Lang's office early, long before Mark showed up. The building was quiet, the kind of professional stillness that makes every sound, every footstep, every breath feel amplified. I sat across from Marisa at her conference table, my hands folded, the evidence neatly organized in a binder in front of me. She asked if I wanted water. I declined. My voice was steady, but inside, a slow tremor thudded beneath my ribs. At exactly 10 minutes past the hour, the door swung open. Mark strolled in with a swagger I recognized too well. Shoulders squared, smirk ready, eyes sharp with false confidence. He always walked like he had already won, even when the game hadn't started. His gaze flicked from Marisa to me, and I watched his expression shift into something performative. Evelyn, he said, sitting down like this was a casual family meeting. We could have handled this without lawyers, you know. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Honestly, this is embarrassing. You've overreacted. Marisa didn't respond. She simply placed a file on the table between us. Mr. Harper, she said evenly, before we continue, I need you to understand that everything discussed here today is documented. You are welcome to remain silent, but any additional statements you make can be used in a legal proceeding. He rolled his eyes. Oh, please, there's no proceeding. I filed the updated beneficiary form, that's all. Daniel wanted me to have the money. He told me that. I felt my jaw clench. My husband was many things: patient, gentle, honest, but a liar he was not. Daniel would never have made such a statement, and Mark knew that. Marisa opened the file and started laying out documents one by one. This, she said calmly, is the original beneficiary form from Hartford Mutual, notarized 8 years ago by a licensed professional. Mark barely glanced at it. This, she continued, sliding another form forward, is the version you submitted. The signature is a forgery. The notary stamp is expired. The handwriting analysis is consistent with a trace sample. Mark scoffed. Anyone can make mistakes. Maybe they mixed something up. Marisa placed a third sheet down. This is the envelope your forged document arrived in. We have postal tracking showing it originated from a P.O. box registered in your name." His jaw twitched, just slightly. She continued, unflinching. "These are time-stamped screenshots of your login attempts to access Daniel's online policy, all traced to the IP address on your home Wi-Fi." His face darkened. "And these," she added, placing the final page in front of him, "are stills from the bank's security footage, showing you presenting forged documents to a financial representative and attempting to pass yourself off as the beneficiary." The last hint of his smugness faded. His fingers tapped against the table, fast, uneven, agitated. I knew that rhythm. It always meant he was scrambling. He inhaled sharply and forced a laugh. "This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything. I was helping her. She asked me to." I met his eyes for the first time since he walked in. "No, Mark, I didn't ask for help. I asked for honesty." For a moment, the room held its breath. He leaned forward, voice sharp. "You don't understand what Mom wanted. She said everything should be equal between us. She said—" I interrupted softly. "Mom also said a lot of things that weren't fair, or kind, or true. You're clinging to her chaos because it benefits you." His cheeks flushed. "You think you're better than me? You think Daniel loved you more because he left you everything?" "He left me what he trusted me to handle," I responded. "And he trusted me because I've earned it my entire life. You haven't." That landed like a stone dropped into deep water. His breathing quickened. His confidence melted, replaced by something rawer, fear. Marisa folded her hands. "Mr. Harper, what you've done constitutes multiple felonies. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft of an insurance payout, identity falsification, interference with estate documents." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I saw the exact moment he realized I wasn't bluffing, that the world he'd carefully constructed, the illusions, the excuses, the lies, was collapsing. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered, voice cracking. I needed help, Eve. I'm drowning. The debt, the bills, everything's falling apart." "I have helped you," I said quietly. "For years. But Daniel's death was not an opportunity for you to fix your life." His eyes glossed with something between anger and pleading. He looked at me like a man clutching the edge of a cliff. "Evelyn, please," he whispered. "Don't press charges. Don't ruin my life. I swear, I'll fix everything. I'll return every document. I'll walk away. Just don't do this." It was startling. How quickly arrogance could turn into desperation. How a man who strutted in 10 minutes earlier now looked small, cornered, almost childlike. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. Bone-deep tired. Before I could respond, the office door clicked open behind us. All three of us turned toward the sound. Standing in the doorway, eyes wide, jaw tight, expression carved from shock, was someone I never expected to see. And the look on their face told me this confrontation was far from over. The person standing in the doorway was my Aunt Lorraine, my mother's younger sister, the one who had raised Mark and me during the summers when Mom drifted in and out of stability. Lorraine wasn't just a relative. She was the closest thing we'd ever had to a safe adult, and she looked furious. Deep, betrayed, bone-deep furious. Her face was pale, her lips drawn thin, her eyes locked on Mark like she was finally seeing him clearly. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of the receptionist looking apologetic. Lorraine must have overheard. She must have listened from the hallway. And now, there would be no pretending, no rewriting, no manipulative charm to shield Mark from consequences. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice trembling. Not with fragility, but with tightly held rage. "Mark, is any of this true?" Mark's shoulders stiffened. "Aunt Lorraine, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand," she snapped, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind her. "I understand perfectly. I heard every word that lawyer said, every piece of evidence, every lie you made." Her gaze flicked to me, softening, briefly, before returning to him. "You forged your sister's name? You tried to take money from Daniel? From his widow? After everything Evelyn has done for you?" Mark's composure dissolved. He looked around the room as if searching for an escape route that wasn't there. "I made a mistake," he insisted, voice rising. "Okay? I didn't mean—" "Stop," Lorraine said sharply. "Stop lying. I raised you long enough to know the truth when I hear it." Mark's mouth snapped shut. Lorraine moved closer, her voice echoing with decades of swallowed disappointment. You've been manipulating this family for years, borrowing money you never repay, making promises you don't keep, pitting people against each other. But this, Mark, this is unforgivable. Mark's jaw tightened. You're acting like I killed someone. You tried to steal from your own sister during the darkest year of her life, Lorraine shot back. You betrayed Daniel's memory. You've crossed lines you can't uncross. He turned to me then, eyes darting, wet, a strange mixture of guilt and resentment. Evelyn, can you please just tell her I was helping you, that we were working together? I held his gaze, steady and unflinching. We weren't working together, Mark. You were working against me. Silence fell, heavy and final. It didn't stay silent for long. The fallout traveled faster than wildfire. By the next morning, several family members had already heard fragments through Lorraine, small pieces of the truth, enough to create a dozen versions of the story. I didn't intend to gossip, but when my cousin called crying, asking what was happening, I realized I needed to speak for myself before distorted versions spread. So I invited the family, those who cared enough to ask, to my living room. Not for drama, not for spectacle, but because I wanted transparency, honesty, the very things Mark had tried to erase. I explained what happened calmly. No theatrics, no venom, just facts, the forged forms, the stolen documents, the bank confrontation, the lawyer's findings, the timeline. Most listened with a kind of stunned grief. A few cried, some shook their heads in disbelief. One of my uncles muttered, This can't be. But then others, those who had been burned by Mark's financial disasters in the past, slowly nodded. I always wondered, my cousin Denise whispered, the way he always had a story, a crisis, a reason why he needed help right that moment. Lorraine, sitting beside me, rubbed my hand supportively. Evelyn has protected this family from the truth for far too long. But I shook my head. I didn't protect anyone from the truth. I protected Mark, because I didn't want to see what he was capable of. And then, to my surprise, sympathy, true, warm, painful sympathy, rippled through the room. For me, not for him. He always took advantage of your kindness, Aunt Ruth said. We all saw it. But we let you handle the burden. That wasn't fair to you. Hearing those words felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the designated caretaker. I wasn't the mediator. I wasn't the one smoothing over Mark's poor decisions. I was simply the person he had wronged, and the family finally saw it clearly. The social consequences came quickly. A cousin refused to co-sign a loan Mark had been begging for. His part-time employer, who happened to be family adjacent, heard about the forgery and abruptly cut back his hours. Friends who once excused his behavior began distancing themselves, no longer convinced by his misunderstood guy persona. And through it all, Mark continued to text me, alternating between apologies, excuses, and explosive accusations. You're ruining my life. You don't know what you're doing. I didn't think you'd actually tell people. Why are you doing this to me? But I wasn't doing anything to him. I was simply refusing to protect him from himself. That clarity anchored me. After the family meeting, I found Mark waiting on my front porch, his posture sagging with desperation. Eve, please, he whispered. I know I messed up, but we're family. You can't turn your back on me. I opened the storm door just enough to be heard. I am not turning my back on you, I said softly. I'm stepping out of the way. There's a difference. His face twisted. So that's it? You're done? Just like that? No. I took a breath. I'm done being exploited. I'm done covering for you. I'm done sacrificing my life to fix yours. He stared at me, wounded and bewildered, as if I'd spoken a foreign language. You can't do this, he whispered. I already have. I closed the door, not with anger, but with finality. That night I lay awake in bed, listening to the quiet hum of the house, feeling the weight of every decision settling into place. I had drawn boundaries. I had told the truth. I had taken my life back, and yet... A question lingered in the darkness. I had the right to press criminal charges. The evidence was clear. The harm was real. The betrayal unforgivable. But should I? As I stared at the ceiling, heart thudding in a slow, uncertain rhythm, I realized one truth. Whatever I chose next, it would change everything. In the weeks that followed the family confrontation, I found myself standing at a crossroads I never expected to face at 63. I had undeniable evidence, unwavering legal support, and every moral right to press charges against Mark. And yet, when I pictured him in handcuffs or sitting in a courtroom while a judge read out the list of crimes, something inside me recoiled. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted peace. So I made a choice, not to absolve him, not to forget, but to choose a restorative path that protected me without dragging me into an ugliness that would swallow whatever was left of my emotional strength. With Marissa's guidance, I filed an official, binding agreement. Mark was forbidden from contacting me, handling any family-related documents, accessing my property, or acting on my behalf in any capacity. The agreement stood as a legal shield, solid enough to protect me, but flexible enough to avoid a criminal charge unless he violated it. Marissa called it mercy with boundaries. Daniel would have called it the calm solution. I accepted it as the one that allowed me to breathe again. In those early days, I realized I had been holding my grief at arm's length, too focused on crisis to feel the depth of my loss. So I took the advice of a social worker I barely remembered meeting during hospice. I joined a grief support group at the community center, a modest room with soft chairs, low lighting, and people who spoke gently because they understood how much weight every sentence carried. The first time I walked in, I sat near the back, unsure of what to say or how to begin. But the stories of others, of spouses lost, of children gone too soon, of dreams interrupted, wove their way into my silence. I found that listening helped me breathe. And after several meetings, I finally spoke. When I said Daniel's name aloud in that circle, the knot in my chest loosened. Little by little, I started doing small things that anchored me back into the world. I bought a fresh journal, thick cream-colored pages, and wrote a few lines every morning. Some days it was a memory of Daniel, other days a fear, a hope, or simply an observation about the weather outside my window. I planted herbs in the small garden Daniel built behind our house, kneeling in the soil that still held traces of his work. I walked the neighborhood in the early mornings, feeling the cool air settle into my lungs, letting my steps find a rhythm that's steadying old wounds. Healing wasn't fast, and it wasn't linear, but each small act pulled me a little further from the heaviness that had taken root after the betrayal. Then came the practical steps, the ones that felt less emotional and more like reclaiming control. I met with a financial advisor twice a month. We reviewed everything: the insurance payout, finally released correctly to me, my retirement income, the house, the savings account Daniel and I had built together over decades. For the first time in months, I felt something close to security. Not comfort, not yet, but a sense that I wasn't navigating the future blindly. Through the advisor, I also learned about a volunteer program at the local adult literacy center. At first I hesitated. I worried I wasn't ready to re-enter the world in that way. But something called me to it. A quiet tug, like Daniel placing a gentle hand between my shoulders and nudging me forward. The first afternoon I spent there, sitting with a 60-year-old woman learning to read her first novel, I felt a kind of purpose I hadn't felt since retiring from counseling. Not the frantic purpose of crisis, not the heavy purpose of caregiving, but the steady, warm kind that fills you without draining you. It reminded me of who I used to be, and who I could still be. As I settled back into life, I began shaping a new rule for myself. No more financial entanglements with family. No lending. No co-signing. No sharing sensitive documents or passwords, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for my own boundaries. I even put it in writing, a personal boundary statement I folded into my journal, a small promise to myself that my compassion would no longer be an open door for exploitation. With time, I rebuilt friendships I'd neglected during Daniel's illness and the chaos that followed. I invited women I'd known for decades over for afternoon tea, women who'd lost spouses, women who'd survived heartbreak, women who understood the fragility and resilience of life after 50. We laughed in ways I didn't think I was capable of anymore. And sometimes, when the conversation grew quiet, I felt Daniel's presence there with us, not in a haunting way, but in a warm, familiar way, like he approved of each small step I was taking. Slowly, the routines of life grew meaningful again. Folding laundry, watering plants, reading in bed, leaving the kitchen window open at night so the breeze could move through the house. These were simple things, but they stitched me back into myself. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the same place I'd once laid out documents tracking my brother's deception, and felt something new. Not justice, not closure. Something quieter, softer. Dignity, my dignity, Daniel's dignity. The dignity I had protected by choosing truth over denial, boundaries over rescue, calm over chaos. And with that dignity came a clarity I hadn't expected. There were so many people who lived through betrayals like mine. So many widows, caretakers, siblings, and family members who lived in silence because they were taught to keep peace at any cost. People who had been manipulated by those they loved. People who needed to know they weren't alone. And as I sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of crickets outside, I realized something. I was finally ready to tell the full truth, not out of anger, but out of hope. For the person who might hear my story and recognize their own. For the person who needs courage to draw a boundary. For the person who's still drowning quietly. I closed my journal, exhaled, and whispered into the quiet room. It's time. And I knew, with an almost startling certainty, that sharing my story was the next step in reclaiming my life. When I look back on everything that happened, the deception, the forged documents, the crushed trust, I am struck not by the size of the betrayal, but by who delivered it. Strangers can wound you, yes. Circumstances can break you. Life can hand you storms you never prepared for. But betrayal from your own blood, that is a different kind of pain. It slips under the skin. It hits the part of you that still remembers childhood birthdays and shared secrets and the naive belief that family, above all else, would be your safe place. What I learned is that betrayal from family doesn't just pierce your heart. It rearranges everything you thought you knew. It forces you to face truths about people you love and truths about yourself. I spent decades believing my role was to keep the peace, to absorb the blows, to protect the bond, even when the bond had been cracking for years. And when the final blow came, when Mark tried to rewrite my husband's last gift and carve himself into a future that didn't belong to him, it forced me to see a truth I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Sometimes the people you love will harm you because they believe you'll survive it, because history has taught them you will. And that realization hurt more than the forged signature, more than the lies, more than the stolen document. It hurt because some part of me had taught him that my love came without boundaries. But boundaries are not walls. They are doors. They are truth. They are the quiet strength it takes to choose documentation over rage, clarity over chaos, dignity over destruction. And that strength is not loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't slam its fist on tables or throw plates at walls. That kind of noise fades quickly. The strength I discovered was quieter, heavier, and far more enduring. It looked like printing copies of documents and placing them in neat stacks. It looked like sitting across from a lawyer and speaking in a calm voice, even as my hands shook. It looked like refusing to yell at Mark, refusing to match his desperation, refusing to let his choices define mine. When everything inside me wanted to scream, I chose to stand still. When everything in me wanted to run, I chose to stay rooted. I learned that emotional maturity, real maturity, isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about walking into conflict without losing yourself. Grief made me vulnerable, but betrayal forced me to rise. Healing from both at the same time was a journey I never expected. Losing Daniel broke something tender in me. Losing trust in my brother broke something old in me, something I'd ignored for decades. Grief and betrayal are twins in their own way, each one a different kind of absence. One steals the person you love. The other steals the person you thought someone was. But what I've come to understand is this: loyalty is earned, not owed, not assumed, not demanded. And peace, true peace, comes not from avoiding hard truths, but from facing them with open eyes. Peace is a byproduct of clarity. When you see someone clearly, even if the truth is painful, you free yourself from the weight of pretending. And when you free yourself, you make space for healing. In the months after everything unfolded, I realized something else too. My desire for harmony had never been a weakness. It had simply been misused. Wanting peace does not make you fragile. It makes you hopeful. It makes you human. The strength lies in protecting that hope, not abandoning it. I want every woman listening, especially those who have carried too much for too long, to hear this. You are not weak for wanting your family to stay intact. You are not foolish for forgiving too many times. You are not naive for believing people can grow. These are signs of a generous heart, but a generous heart still deserves boundaries. A loving heart still deserves safety. And a loyal heart still deserves loyalty in return. If life has taught me anything, it's this. You can recover from almost anything if you refuse to abandon yourself, your dignity, your intuition, your truth. There were moments in this journey when I questioned whether standing up for myself would make me cold or hard. Instead, it made me softer in better ways. Softer toward myself, toward my needs, toward the small daily rhythms that bring meaning to life. I found grace in routine, comfort in rebuilding, and strength in every decision that honored Daniel's memory and my own worth. And now, when I walk through my home, I feel Daniel's presence in the quiet corners, the way he taught me to breathe through uncertainty, to handle life with patience, and to choose integrity even when anger feels easier. His voice lives in every boundary I've learned to set, in every document I now keep carefully organized, in every calm decision I make. He taught me that dignity isn't just something you hold, it's something you practice. I survived grief. I survived betrayal. And in the space that followed, I rebuilt myself. Not by becoming harder, but by becoming clearer. So I leave you with this thought, one I wish someone had told me long before the bank, long before the forged document, long before I had to confront my own brother. Protect your heart without apology. Heal at your own pace. And never underestimate the strength it takes to choose grace over chaos. Because there will come a day, if you choose yourself, when you will walk forward with peace in your chest, dignity in your spine, and a future that no one gets to rewrite but you. Has someone ever tried to rewrite your life the way they wanted it? If you've lived something similar, share your story. You never know who it might help. And if this journey resonated with you, feel free to stay a while. There's more to talk about.